This is a video explaining how to goal kick well in rugby. The first thing you should know is there are two main types of goal kicking in rugby. You've got the kicking tees that look like this, and they strike the ball like this. And you've also got probably the harder method that's becoming a bit more old-fashioned nowadays, which Dan Carter, Johnny Wilkinson, the likes of those lot were most renowned for. The first method, however, is a lot easier, and you see it more and more nowadays, and this is the one I personally prefer doing. While the second one is a bit different in terms of technique, most of the fundamentals I'm going to be talking about in this video do still apply. The first thing you need to know about goal kicking is setting up the ball correctly on the tee. To a lot of people, it makes most sense to put the ball facing directly upwards or even facing slightly backwards because they think this is the best way to generate backspin on the ball, thus producing a good kick. But rather the opposite is true. You're better off angling the ball forwards because irrelevant of whether you point the ball backwards, forwards or facing directly up, you want to be striking the ball about a third of the way up. So pointing the ball forward actually opens up the sweet spot. So essentially you have less room for error, and this is why we point the ball forwards. And with this technique, you want the ball to be pointing directly down the middle of the posts. Unless, of course, it's windy, in which case you have to take this into account. Different goal kickers prefer to angle the ball different amount forwards. Some people believe that the flatter the ball is, the further the ball will go. So essentially you can get more distance on the ball. From my personal experience, I haven't necessarily found this to be true, but in the same way, I do actually prefer the balls to be quite flat as well. Most kicking tees nowadays are adjustable, and choosing the right height is actually very important in my opinion. If the tee is too high, there's a tendency to hook the ball, which will result in the ball curling. So if I'm right-footed and my tee is too high for me, there's a very high chance the ball will curl right to left. Some goal kickers do this deliberately actually. Like in the recent Lions tour, you saw Bowden Barrett curl most of his kicks from right to left. Perhaps the tee is a little bit high for him. In the same way though, a lot of goal kickers curl the ball deliberately, so it's not necessarily a bad thing. Jonathan Thurston from the NRL obviously deliberately curls his kicks a lot, and he's one of the most successful goal kickers around. However, in my opinion, you're better off hitting the ball straight and true, so try and get a tee that isn't too high and isn't too low, and ultimately you've just got to experiment. In the same way, the tee can't be too low because that puts a lot of strain on your leg, which is why the second method I showed at the start of the video, which I'm not going to be talking about, is a little bit different technique-wise. There is no best way to run up to the ball. It's all about being comfortable with it, and once you are comfortable with the run up, try and keep it as consistent as possible. The only thing I will advise people to do is probably be about 4 to 5 steps away, and try not to be any further because of course in a match from conversions, if you take too long to run up, they can charge your kick down, and this is the last thing you want to happen. So try and keep your run up short, but in the same sense have enough so you can actually hit the ball with a lot of venom. You want to be probably about 45 degrees away from the ball in terms of obviously the angle. If you're too straight, there's a very high tendency you'll just scuff your kick completely because you can't bring your leg back far enough, but we'll discuss that later. And if you're at too much of an angle to the ball, there's a very high tendency to hook the ball, and so you curl it, which as we mentioned earlier isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's not the best way I believe of kicking it. Connecting the run up and the strike to the ball is your final stride before you actually smack it. You want this stride to be very, very large, as you can see in these clips, significantly larger than the steps you have previously taken. This is so you can generate enough momentum to transfer all of your body weight through the ball. You do not want this distance to be too small because you cannot generate enough power, nor too big, because if it's too big you can't hit the ball properly as well. It's all about being comfortable, and this is a common theme you'll find through this video. Where your standing foot needs to land should be consistent with every single kick, as this can actually have a bigger effect than a lot of people believe to imagine. You do not want your foot to be next to the ball, but in the same way, greater than, 3 of your foot widths away is probably going to be too far. And as I mentioned earlier, just like with your run-up, it's all about being comfortable with this. When you're trying to strike the ball and your standing foot lands, you want to be sort of side on. You'll see it in this screenshot right here. If you're standing right over the ball, it's impossible to get accuracy. Standing in this sort of slanted position is something you shouldn't really think about. Well, you should think about when you're starting, but then it should be very natural. But this is essentially the standing position you want to be in. In terms of the part of the foot you want to be using, you probably want to be using the bone at the end of your big toe. So follow your big toe up your foot and you'll find a really solid bone. This is the hardest part of your foot, and so this is the part you'll be generating the most power with. It's also important to remember that with your ankle, as you approach the ball to kick, or when you make the strike rather, you want to be pointing your toes down. This generates the biggest arc, so you can generate most power, and also puts your ankle in the strongest position, so you avoid injury and also lose the smallest amount of power. Now I can actually get on with talking about the fundamentals of the actual strike of the ball. I mentioned earlier you want to be striking the ball probably about a third of the way up. Depending on how you've angled your ball on the tee, I've marked on the screen the part of the ball you want to be striking. You want to hit the ball at exactly this height, because if you hit it any higher, you will not generate enough backspin, and you have to generate backspin because otherwise the ball will not stay in the air long enough, nor fly with a straight trajectory over the posts, which is obviously exactly what you want to achieve. In the same way, it can't be too low, because if you hit it too low, you generate too much backspin, and in the same way, you don't get a very good power transfer, as most of your energy has gone in spinning the ball as opposed to generating distance. After your large stride to the ball, and your foot has landed, you obviously are drawing your other leg back. You draw the leg back too far, and you really snatch at the ball, and you can't generate enough power, but in the same way, you have to bring your leg back far enough for you to get a good kick. A lot of people think this is how you generate power, similar to how a golfer will swing his club. In my opinion, it's not that simple. The drawing your leg back should just be a very comfortable process, and should be a very fast one too. So focus more on speed rather than the distance at which you bring your leg back. Most importantly, after you hit the ball is the follow through and the weight transfer. This is the most important part of the kick, because even if you scuff your strike or something's wrong in your technique, if your body weight is moving towards the post, then this is the most powerful force and will obviously see your kick go in that vague direction. After you've struck the ball, the first thing you want to focus on is raising your leg and quite literally pointing your foot towards your target. In the same way, you also want to land past the tee. If you don't transfer your weight and finish beyond the tee, then it means you aren't transferring all of your body weight and so are not producing maximum momentum. This obviously puts a lot of strain on your lower leg and ultimately hinders the distance you can get on the ball. So it's incredibly important to finish past the tee. You don't necessarily have to finish past the tee though. This slow motion replay of Owen Farrell shows that he just raises his leg, but what you'll also see is he's generated the ability to transfer all of his body weight without having to go past the ball. If you look at his left leg, you can see his heel raises slightly off the ground, which indicates all of his weight is going through his right leg and obviously through the ball. Conversely, in this replay of Elliot Daly, who's a very long range distance kicker, further than Farrell, you can see he finishes past the ball, but his follow through isn't that great. So for you, it's all about finding a balance. Something that I tried to do when I was first learning how to goal kick, and I'm not an amazing goal kicker by any account, I've still got lots of things to improve on, but I always tried to emulate George Ford. He's not the best goal kicker, and he strikes the ball completely differently. But this is irrelevant. What I want you to focus on is what he does after he struck the ball. If you look at Ford, after he struck the ball, he keeps his head down, and in the same way, he also runs forwards towards the posts. This means he's ensuring he's transferring all of his weight, and it's also very important to keep your head down, because this is the position you are strongest in. Running where the ball goes also forces your leg to point towards your target. If you run somewhere, your leg's lifting up and landing. This is the exact thing you want to happen. When you struck the ball, you want your foot to land past the ball and the ball go there. Individually, all of these pointers are very straightforward and fairly easy to perfect in fairness, but putting them all together in one kick is immensely difficult, and producing this consistently is exactly the same. Ultimately, it's all down to practice, and with goal kicking, in my opinion at least, skill is pretty much irrelevant. If you can do these stages well, you're set to go, irrelevant of whether you've got strong legs or just a good striker on the ball in general. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's my first time I've done a sort of a speaking video, so let me know what you think of it. And I hope this gave you a good understanding as to how you strike a rugby ball off the tee well.